So we're going to show you today some different ways that you can use pool noodles. I have a girlfriend that recently moved to a house with a pool, and she was using the pool noodle with her kids in the traditional way, which is this. And there's nothing wrong with using the pool noodle like this, but just want to show you some different ways that you can incorporate the pool noodle to help your kids learn how to swim. Keep in mind that this is a flotation device, so it does provide some lift, but not all pool noodles are made the same. So here we have a jumbo pool noodle, and you can probably see that the size is quite different. So the bigger the pool noodle, the bigger the lift. So I'm going to use the pool noodle and it's causing me to lift. If I use the little pool noodle, it causes less lift. So in swimming lessons, we talk about a progression. And so if we start with a bigger noodle, it's giving more lift. Eventually we want to move to a skinnier noodle, which gives us less lift. So I want to show you first a couple of different ways we can use the skinny pool noodle in addition to just under the armpits. One of the difficulties with under the armpits is this is not necessarily a streamlined position for floating. Right now, if I turn, I'm holding my head up and my bum is up, but it's not really a natural or comfortable position. So we want to work towards having our front floats in a position that is appropriate for swimming. When we swim on our front, we want to have our face in the water and down. So when we swim with our face down, we want to be on the top of the water looking down, blowing our mouth and nose bubbles. So we can practice that with the assistance of the noodle intact in one piece by holding at 10 o'clock on the clock, by holding at 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock, and then leaning forward, bum back, leaning, and going down. Then as we're working towards our rocket ship glides, which is a streamlined position, we can hold the noodle with the hands close together like Superman, like this. So those are some variations on the front. Then when we look at our variations on the back, we can put the noodle behind us and up in the armpits. Grabbing it in the armpits, and we want to lean back and tummy up. Relaxing the arms out like a big pancake. So the noodle is providing me some assistance, and especially for those kids that are more nervous, it's going to provide some comfort that they're not sinking. Without the noodle, we have kids that are more nervous and they might be doing more of a bathtub. So it's providing some lift underneath the armpits. So let me show you again. Tummy up, arms out, and this is a great way to practice the back float. Back float is really important to water safety. We can float in water where we can't touch, and it's a good way to self-recover, especially if we're not comfortable putting our face in the water. If we have two skinny pool noodles, we can actually practice our back float with more support. So keep in mind that one pool noodle, one skinny pool noodle versus one thick pool noodle is going to have, this one's going to have less buoyancy, less float, less support, and if that's what I want, that's great. But if I'm working with a child that's younger or more nervous, or perhaps they're more hunched up, then I may want a second pool noodle, and the skinnier ones are easier to place because of the chunky ones are harder, especially on a skinny little child where they're going to roll around. I'm going to put one up under my armpits, and then I'm going to put one under my bum, supporting my hips. And so you can see I have extra lift in my core, which is heavy, that if I remove the noodle and I'm not correcting, I sink. So if I put it under my bum or hips, it lifts my center of mass in a way that replicates a really good back float. And if I'm really sinky, I could incorporate a third noodle up under my legs. But this is not representative of real swimming, having this flotation by my feet. So now let's try that to compare with our chunky noodle and show you the difference. The chunkier noodle is much harder for kids to grasp as well. So I'm an adult, but my adult female hands still have a hard time really gripping the noodle. So little kids especially, that's where they're going to be more comfortable grabbing a smaller piece of noodle. So the bigger noodle, compare it with the amount of lift it gives me. It does all of the heavy lifting. It does all of the work, so I'm not necessarily learning how to swim on my own. So the bigger noodle gives me more lift, which when I'm learning how to swim may be helpful or may not be helpful. So the other way we can use the skinny noodle is if we're practicing our side glides. Side glides are a more advanced concept as we're learning to move from our front glide to our side glide in preparation for front crawl, right? Our front crawl involves bilateral breathing, which involves moving to the side. So I can take the noodle, put it under my armpits, and I can practice going on my side by gluing my ear to my arm, and then I'm going to roll around onto my other arm. Then I can roll around onto my other arm. And this is not going to be possible in the same way with the chunky noodle. With the chunky noodle, it's going to give me so much lift, and I'm very tall, that see, I don't even get full extension without repositioning the noodle. I have to drag the noodle through the needle under my armpits. It's a little bit awkward. So this is where I'm saying when you're purchasing your noodles at the store, and you can get noodles at any store, whether it's Walmart, Canadian Tire, any retailer, the chunky noodles may look like they're better, but they have limitations, okay? The other thing you can do with your skinny noodles is cut them into pieces, right? So here's a smaller piece of a bigger noodle. And you might think to yourself, well, why would I want the smaller piece of noodle? Typically this happens as these noodles get older and waterlogged. This is an open cell noodle, so this is a very inexpensive. You can see at the end of the noodle that it's open. The plastic is actually open cell, and so over time it will get saturated and break apart. Closed cell noodles are typically a lot more expensive, a lot more dense foam, and they're quite a bit different. They have a lot more lift. They're often used for aquafit as well, for resistance, pushing in the water like this. So as the noodle gets waterlogged over time, instead of throwing out the entire noodle, you can snip off the part of the noodle that's not waterlogged and save it to create these little batons. So with these little batons, we can actually use them for smaller hands. So if I was a smaller child, perhaps 3 or 4 years old, this would be the appropriate amount for me to grab on in my Superman glide without too much stability. So the difference, if I glide, I'm limited. This is the only support I get, and so I'm still responsible for having a strong core and not wobbling. Whereas if I have a longer noodle, it's going to function like a snowplow, and I'm going to have all of this support stabilizing my glide, which can be beneficial for some ages, or it's too much assistance for more advanced beginner swimmers. So when I use the fully extended noodle, I could really do very little work because the noodle is doing all of the stabilizing for me. So one baton is maybe not so helpful. Having 2 batons would be a little bit more helpful. So this is just breaking a noodle into 2 pieces. You could also snip it down into 2 sets of batons, right, for small hands. But the benefit with the batons like this, or let me make a second one, right, 2 different sizes. So I could use this for slightly larger support if I'm doing progressions. If I'm a 3 or let's say 5 or 6 year old child and I'm starting with a full size noodle, I could move down to a smaller noodle. This is the half side, so less stability. And then eventually I could move down to the smallest size, which would be very close to an unassisted rocket ship. This would provide a little bit of assistance gliding like this. Now the other thing we can do with these smaller pieces is we can practice our floats. And they function a little bit like aqua aerobic dumbbells, barbells. We can practice our front floats with a little bit of support. Or we can practice on our back. So this is a small amount of support compared to the full noodle underneath my back. So the other thing you can do with your noodle is as you're progressing from front glide to front swim or front crawl, that's where we incorporate the movement of the hands. And I see a lot of instructors practice kids moving the hands and asking them to pass this huge floppy noodle back and forth between their hands, right? And we're talking about small kids who might be 6 or 7, and this is a big floppy noodle to contend with. Why not in that situation practice with a smaller piece of noodle that gives them some flexibility? Why not have them practice with a half piece of noodle, which is much more manageable to pass and provide some stability and support than this big floppy noodle that, especially when you're going to have multiple kids swimming in a wave, creates a lot of a big traffic jam. So let me show you the difference. If I'm practicing my front swim arms, right, I'm taking up a large amount of space. When I'm practicing with a smaller noodle, I still have the option to grab, but I can also then start to mimic the proper bilateral full body rotation by having the noodle can actually move slightly to the side as opposed to that very large noodle that was just taking up all this space. So I can practice that bilateral rotation. The water movement is going to be much easier with a smaller piece of noodle. And that's not to say noodles are your only options. Many pools will have other equipment for exactly this drill. But if you're on a budget or you're working at your house, there's no need to buy multiple pieces of equipment. You could buy 5 pool noodles, cut up 2 of them, and it costs less than $20. The other thing is being aware that the pool noodle, a lot of kids can also sit in it like an armchair or like a bathtub. So the noodle can be in the back or the noodle can be in the front. When we change that position, it changes our center of gravity and it changes how we swim. So kids are not always comfortable leaning forward. They may want to practice swimming with some support that starts to get them slightly on their back. Or even you can swim on your front with the noodle behind you and it's not pushing you forward, it's keeping you slightly back. So although it's not necessarily the best long term, it would allow for a child to have a little bit of support without the full support. This is doing all of the work. Meanwhile, if I put the noodle behind me like an armchair, right, I'm sitting in my armchair, and especially if I create a space behind the back so I'm not getting support from that loop, it's just under my armpits, then it's going to give me just a teeny bit of support as I do my, maybe I'm doing a shuffle, or I'm working on my doggy paddle, very, very beginner swimming. The other progression with side glides is literally just doing a kind of like a Superman, Superwoman, kind of reach to the side, and literally just kicking. The same thing applies. A shorter noodle will provide less stability, which is a progression as they're improving. So this is going to be less stability than a large floppy noodle. If I want more stability when I'm introducing a skill, this is good. But as I'm improving, we need to take away that assistance slowly and gradually as a progression to allow the child to improve. So this is the first progression. Then the second progression could be my half noodle. Then my third progression could be my quarter of a noodle, so a small piece, still giving me some support but not a huge amount of lift. And then my final progression could be attempting it without any assistance. So when we're learning how to swim, we learn how to float on our front. And we also learn how to float on our back. So these are two very different but vital skills. Different kids and different adults will be more comfortable floating on their front or floating on their back, but both are necessary to learn how to swim safely. We cannot just go through life floating and swimming on back or front. So the other thing we learn in swimming is our Flipover floats. So that is literally like flipping over, similar to a pancake without touching the bottom. So I'm very tall, but I'm going to make an effort not to touch the bottom of the pool as I demo my Flipover. Now this is a skill that is very challenging for new swimmers, and so we can also practice with the noodle. The full size of noodle is going to be necessary because with our float, we're keeping our hands at 10 o'clock and 12 o'clock. We want that full spread. We don't want a skinny extension. We want a full spread. Therefore, we're going to use the full size of noodle, and it can also provide us some support in different placements. If I was nervous, now this noodle is also getting soggy because it's open cell, right, which is the very affordable noodles that we see at many stores. If I wanted more support, I could do the same exercise if I can squeeze with my hands. Or we can also put the noodle underneath. So hopefully you can see from all of this, there's lots of different ways that you can use pool noodles. And the goal of this video was to show you that there are two different sizes of noodle. There is a skinnier noodle and a fatter pool noodle. There's also going to be open cell, which is squishy, it soaks up water, and then closed cell, which is a much denser foam. So when you're using your pool noodles to practice swimming with your kids or for yourself, make sure you think about how much assistance, how much support do you want for the skill, because different quantities of support will limit how the person is progressing in improving in their quality of swimming. If there's too much support, they're not able to move towards doing the skill on their own. And then the aid is taking away their ability to grow and improve because they're becoming too dependent on it.